Ken D. from La Mesa, California.
Good morning. My name is Ken. I'm an alcoholic. You guys are real brave. 9 o'clock in the morning. It's like, whoa. Some general housekeeping rules. If you need to leave or want to leave, just do it. Don't feel like you have to sit here. And I will try to make my comments through my experience. In the 12 and 12, it talks about this spirituality thing being an individual adventure. And I'm a strong adherent to that it is an individual adventure. That my experience and yours may vary in some areas. So I can only share with you what I've experienced. And in fact, in many cases, perceptionally what I've experienced, because that may not what happened at all. Some of the things I remember most vividly never happened. So the bottom line is that, it may be just a thought, and nothing else. And in the original edition of the Big Book and subsequent editions, there's a story in the back, and there's a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay that says, pity me the heart that is slow to learn what the quick mind sees at every turn. And what it's alluding to is the fact that we grow up so much more quickly in our minds, brain-wise, than we do emotionally. And it's even more so with spirituality. It seems like as you grow up, you kind of grow away from the spirituality thing. And I think it's because mainly you get put on a rail to start making money and start owning things. It's about being something, It's not like it's not enough being something, you got to be something. And once you start that process, it seems to be a process that takes you further and further away from your root. The root for me is spirituality, and I know that if you want to be spiritual, you have to slow down. And if you want to be material, you have to speed up. And therein lies the paradox, is that the one takes you in one direction and the other one takes you in the other direction. And it's very difficult for most people to be able to manage this. So you have to let go of it. And the other thing is before I get going, is I think of the Buddhist cantra, which says, he who speaks does not know, So I'm just sharing with you what I don't know. And as far as changing your life, I'll do as little as possible to do that today, because that's not my job. My job is simply to share my experience, strength, and hope with you. All I know about spirituality is that if you take the word spiritual and you look inside of it, there's a word ritual, R-I-T-U-A-L. And what happens in most cases is, it was true for me, is I didn't have a spiritual ritual. I had a lot of rituals that took me in a lot of places and a lot of directions, but they surely weren't spiritually motivated. I mean, when you heard me say, oh God, it usually meant I was in a shit heap. Oh God, how did this happen? How did I get here? And my big thing was I always had the ability to get other people to follow me. And so that usually I would turn around and there would be people behind me who thought I knew what I was doing, which put them at a tremendous disadvantage, because they just thought, well, Ken knows, and Ken didn't have a clue, I didn't have a clue. And the deal is that I get to see more and more how much of this deal is perceptual. It's not what's happening, it's what we think is happening. In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and in the 12 and 12, it talks very strongly about, in the steps, that we have to come to a new way of life. And that new way of life means that whatever we were doing up to that point obviously wasn't working. The person that I brought to Alcoholics Anonymous was not a person who could stay sober. So I had to basically get in touch with whoever I really was so as I could start to do those things that needed to be done. I think that in my own experience that as I read the Big Book, to me, it became very clear that I was going to not only have to stop doing a number of things, but I was going to have to start doing a number of things that I just hadn't been doing. And in the spiritual evolvement, I've done a lot of wacko things. 6 years ago, I gave away everything I owned, and to the chagrin of many people who thought I was losing my mind, I went and lived on a Navajo reservation over in New Mexico. And I stayed over there for about 9 months to a year with these Navajo, and did industrial amounts of nothing. And in doing industrial amounts of nothing, what happened was something happened. The book says something happens. When the alcoholic drinks, something happens. When the alcoholic is on a spiritual path, something happens. And it doesn't matter whether you're an Al-Anon, Alateen, Alapet, alcoholic, it doesn't matter. At some point, you have to come to the question that all of us ask, and that is, what sustains me? What sustains me? What keeps me going when there seems to be no reason to keep going? And down deep inside, as the book said, and down deep inside every person is the fundamental idea of God. And the fundamental idea of God seems to be formed when you're young. And you grow up, and God gets kind of lumped in with the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. It's like something you find out later isn't exactly what you thought. And you're being told by people who you love about things that you find out later on, that doesn't work for me. And I don't know how to deal with this because I'm in conflict now with what I've been told by people I love, but now it doesn't work for me. And so the guilt starts, And I feel that if there's anybody who should come out with a card about guilt, it should be Hallmark, And it should say, guilt, the gift that keeps on giving, because and somebody could make a lot of money with that, because that's what guilt is. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It's like, how do I tell these people that I'm not on the same page they're on? When I decided to go live with the Navajo, the family I had left called me up and they said, we've had a little family meeting and we think you've lost your mind. And I thanked them for the compliment, and I said, not yet, but I'm really working on it, and that's the deal. When you're associating your life with something that somebody else isn't, they immediately think you've gone crazy. If any of the prophets of past generations were to come back and roam the earth today, they'd probably be locked up and put in an insane asylum, because it's like, who would think this way? Turn the other cheek, give all you have to other people, come on, what do you got, one oar in the water or what? There's the lights are on, but there's nobody home, in that scenario. In our society, it's about who you are, what you have, The only difference, I'm getting to that age too, where, you get older, and the only difference between a retired gentleman and an old man is money. And that's what people will tell you. He's a retired gentleman. He's an old man, and so it's a perceptional thing. And all I know is that as I have moved along in this journey, I realized every day is a new adventure for me. And every day I have to let go of some things that I thought were important so as to take on new things. To get to the place that you've never been, you have to go a way you've never gone. And in going that way, you're going to look silly at times. And for an alcoholic, that's not good. We don't mind doing things as long as we look good doing them. It's not about that I'm being arrested. It's how am I being arrested, I don't know about you guys, but when I was always being arrested, the first thing they would tell you is you have the right to remain silent, But I never had the ability, I always thought there was something else to say, and then you'd say it. And then that wasn't a good thing. And so the bottom line is that as you move along in spirituality, you realize that you need to have a ritual, and that ritual has to work for you. And you get in touch with the fact that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson had some tremendous insights that I don't think many people really talk about. When he talks about God in his story, he said he's only looking for a God that has two things. And that is a God that's free of time and a God that's free of limitation. Now, if you slow that down, that's very significant. Somehow, some way, this drunk, in the early stages of his sobriety, was able to see and connect in a very meaningful way that all limitation is brought about by time. Once you start thinking in time, you start thinking in limitation. Because time means I only have so much of this to be someone, accomplish something, or, whatever the deal is. And that creates limitation. And that limitation creates a sense of urgency about getting it done. And with that sense of urgency usually comes stress and discomfort. And so I'm going to put you at ease today because I'm going to tell you something. If you like it, good. If you don't, that's okay too. Don't worry about it. But you have absolutely nothing to get done. And you have all of eternity to work on it. You have absolutely nothing to get done. And once that pressure is removed, that's when you hear people say, because up until then, it's like, I got to get this done. And time is the big handicap. Once you start thinking in time, you lose track of this moment, this now. And when you lose track of this now is when you lose track of God, because God is always in this now. In fact, in that book, it says, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him Thursday. Like that. It's like, may you find him now. And when you find him now means to find him now. And so time becomes the thing that keeps you from finding God. That book just talks about becoming God conscious. And God conscious means to wake up, to be aware of. It doesn't mean you have to do something. It just means you have to be. Instead of being a human doing, you have to become a human being. And therein lies the contradiction for a lot of folks. They think, well, until I find God, I have to do this, 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 and this. And then God somehow will appear. And the deal is what we're looking for, we're looking with. The very thing we're looking to get, we already have. If God were to take his eye off me for a minute, I would cease to exist. So therefore, I must always be in his eye. And through each and every one of us in this room, God is trying to become something he's never been before. And our job is not to impede him. Our job is to facilitate that by allowing it to be. And that means you don't want to be like someone else, because if you're like someone else, you're disrupting the flow. You're not supposed to be like someone else. You're supposed to be like you. And that's what God is doing. He's trying to become something he's never been before through us. And people say, well, we're all alike. We are all alike. Except we have different DNA. We have different fingerprints. Trust me on that one. And we have different hair frolic. We have different everything. And so this isn't the Ford assembly line where you come off and every car looks exactly like the one before. God has gone to great lengths to make sure we're individually different so that he, in his evolution, can become something. And through us, he's trying to become something. And if you don't know the right answers, it's no big deal. People get all caught up in, I got to know the right answer. There is no right answer. In the book, in the big book, in the 12 and 12, it talks about if you want to live a life based on your own value, you can do that. Or you can live a life based on God's perfect value. And you have that choice. And as every alcoholic can tell you who's been sober for a number of years, there comes a point where you can start living in comfort. And that comfort is what I'm doing works. But Bill had a statement to address that. And he said, oftentimes the good can become the enemy of the best. Meaning that I can find a comfort level that works for me, but it doesn't mean if I stop growing that that's the best that I could be. I'm supposed to keep growing. And that means allowing things to happen and allowing life to happen. And the three things I had to learn to do, which were very difficult for me, was I had to learn not to resist this moment, not to deny this moment, and not to run away from this moment. And in not resisting, denying, or running away from this moment, I got to do what? Live in this moment. And therefore, I was able to get the experience of this moment. And I had never been able to do that before. If something were happening in my life and it wasn't comfortable, I did one of those three things. I either resisted it, I denied it, or I took off. And the end result was, instead of having the experience, I had a happening. It wasn't an experience. I didn't learn anything from it. And that's why alcoholics of my type have to experience or have happening 600, 700, 800 times before it says, oh, that's what that's about. Pretty clever people we are, I don't know about you, but my character defects stand in a line, and I'm dealing with one right now, and it's right in front of me. And then when I'm done dealing with it, it goes to the end of the line. And I think I've gotten rid of it. And it's just working its way back up again. And about 4 years later, I'm going, oh, shit. Here it is again. And the deal is here it is right back again. And so it's an ongoing process. But fortunately, the process is a good process because in it, by learning that I'm not perfect, I can accept other people's imperfection. And that gets tough. Because I always thought that somehow I had to be perfect and the people I interacted with have to be perfect. And that's just not the way it is. If you're going to deal with another human being, there are 3 things you have to accept, whether you want to accept it or not. And that is, that person is either going to die, they're going to leave, or they're going to change. And if you can't accept that about a relationship of any kind, then you're going to be at odds with that relationship because those are the only 3 things that happen. Nothing is going to stay the same. Buddha used to go around and talk in little villages. That's how he spent his life. And he tells the story of how in this one village, this man came up to him after waiting in line to talk to him. And when he got to Buddha, he slapped his face. And he must have been alcoholic because he took off. And he must have gone home and thought about it because the next day he was in line again, Worked his way back up to Buddha, and when he got in front of Buddha, he said, I owe you an amends. And Buddha supposedly responded by saying, why? And he said, because I'm the man who slapped your face yesterday. And Buddha supposedly responded by saying, the man whose face you slapped no longer exists. And it's quite obvious the man who slapped that face no longer exists. So the bottom line is there's nothing in this world but impermanence. Everything is changing continually. And if I find that unacceptable, then my life is going to be unacceptable. And I said about knowing the right answer. One of my stories that I like is the lion in the jungle. And the lion goes up to the giraffe and he says, who's the king of the jungle? And the giraffe says, you, Mr. Lion, you are the king of the jungle. He says, don't you forget it. And then he goes up to the tiger and he says, who's the king of the jungle? And the tiger says, you, Mr. Lion, you're the king of the jungle. He says, don't you forget it. And he does this to several animals until finally he gets to the elephant. And he says to the elephant, who's the king of the jungle? And the elephant whips him up by his tail, spins him over his head 4 or 5 times, and throws him about 50 yards where he hits a tree and he slides down. And the elephant turns around and walks away. And the lion gets up, proud, alcoholic, brushes himself off and yells, hey, just because you don't know the right answer, that's no way to behave, And that's the way it is in life. We just go through life regardless of the reality of it, changing the reality to meet what we think the reality should be. And therefore, if you look at most alcoholics, we're trying to learn techniques to live in a reality we're not in to solve problems we don't have. And that's why at the end of the day, it's very tiresome. You cannot solve a phantom problem. That's why it's called phantom. It doesn't exist. And you hear people say, well, what if this happens? And then what if that happens? And if she says that and he does this? And then you get into bed at night and you go, boy, that's a tough day. And all you did was deal in delusion and illusion all day long. The deal with this is, I could see this. I have a granddaughter who's now closing in on 18. She'll be 18 in a couple of months, next month. And when she was small, she used to stay with me over the summer for a couple of weeks. And we used to play checkers. And this is my best spiritual story. Because when she would play checkers with me, I had only one purpose really of playing checkers with her. And that is to enjoy the time with her. And my second purpose, which was very secondary, was to let her win. So my deal was no matter where she would move, I would move so she could jump me. And I would do this all over the board. Didn't matter where I moved. I would move moves you can't make in checkers. Totally illegal moves, But I'd get in front of her and she'd go, Grandpa, and then she'd jump in, and she thought that was terrific. And then I'd have to king her, and all that stuff went on. And the bottom line is that I was letting her win. But then, each summer when she would come back to stay, that became more and more difficult because she understood more and more about the game. And she'd say, Grandpa, you can't move like that. You can only move from here to here. And Grandpa, And as I watched her, I realized that's pretty much the way it works with me and God. He's designed to just spend time with me and to let me win. And I've become so good at the game, I'm correcting him. No, you can't make that move. That move doesn't work for me. I'm not going along with that move. I'll give you some more time because you obviously made that very quickly. That was a quick decision. You're going to need a little more time to formulate this. And I'll give it to you. Hey, I'm sober. I'll give you the time you need. But the bottom line is that that's just the way it comes. And if it's not the way I want it, I know it has to be what? Incorrect. And sometimes God does bank shots just to show off. He'll head you in this direction and you think, okay, this is it. You're after it like a frisbee. And you realize it's not a frisbee, it's a boomerang. It's whoa, and you get whiplash trying to make the turn, and you got to go back and say, that's not the way I thought this would be. And you do that over and over and over again. And in the meantime, what you notice is that the reason you don't like certain things is because this is heavy stuff. You don't like them. This is not the way I would have done it. So it's obvious that God does make mistakes. And in correcting God, He sometimes responds. And He says, okay, you don't want that? I'll give you what you want. Which is even a greater hazard. If you look around, you'll see there's only two kinds of unhappy people in this world. Those who get what they want and those who don't. Because we always think that we know what's best. And the nice thing about being sober and growing spiritually, at least in my experience, is that as you go through this process, you become more and more comfortable with life. And you realize that life is going to happen just the way it's going to happen. It really has nothing to do with me condoning or not condoning. In the 10th step, it talks about love and tolerance is our code. Love and tolerance. Bill and the boys knew who they were writing that book for. They had already talked to Dr. Silkworth. They knew we were in full flight from reality. They outright mental defectives and people who just don't know how to get things right. So they knew what they were doing when they wrote the book. So they wrote love and tolerance. The only reason that tolerance is in there is because they knew we would judge as human beings. If we just had the love part of it, we wouldn't be judging. They put the tolerance in there knowing these guys are not just going to love, they're going to have to judge. So we'll put tolerance in there. And eventually, hopefully, that tolerance will leave. We won't have a need for it because they'll get more and more into the love part of it. And if you watch little kids, they do instinctively what we're trying to learn to do. The kids just seem to know. I was in an elevator with a kid one time and he was scratching his head. And I said to him, why are you scratching your head? And he looked at me like, where did you just land from? He said, because I'm the only one knows it itches. You see, adults don't think like that. They would tell you, well, I got this, stuff to stop the scratching, but it hasn't worked so far. And I've talked to my physician and I'm going to go see a dermatologist. And It's like watching somebody milk a mouse. It's a lot of activity, but very little milk. And that's the way adults do. We feel like we have to continually explain all this stuff that's just part of what? Life. And kids aren't like that. And kids say things naturally. Down in San Diego, we have a place that's called Seaport Village. And if you go down there on any given day, they fly these beautiful kites where people have these huge kites. They sell them all along there. And they have 2 kites flying at the same time, and they can cross them. And it's not like the old days where you just put a kite up. These are like all kinds of decorative kites. And these kids fly them, and you just watch them. And one day I went by this boy who was about 10 or 11, and we were having those June gloom days where the clouds are in low, and his kite was above the cloud. And I said to him, "How do you know your kite is still there?" And he looked at me just like the kid in the elevator. And he said, "'Cause I can feel the pull of it, mister." And that's the way it is in spiritual world that we live in. That when you're connected to God, you feel the pull of it. You don't have to have anybody explain it to you. In fact, the more words you use, the less value it seems to have. And it's sometimes something really exciting happens to you spiritually, and you tell it to someone right away, and you're all worked up about it. And then you tell it the second time, and you try to perfect it from the first time. And then you tell it a third time, and you try to perfect it from the first and the second. So by the time you tell it the 8th time, it's a story. It's not the deal anymore. And as you move further and further away from it, it has less and less impact, because now we've become interested in the story instead of the event. And that happens continually in our lives until eventually we become great storytellers, but we miss out on a lot of good experiences. And all I know from growing in Alcoholics Anonymous is I had a sponsor who believed that, and he instilled this in you, that if you were going to live happy, joyous, and free, you were going to have to come to grips with the fact that you didn't have all the power. When I work with newcomers today, I do a demonstration with them, which I'll do with you guys if you want to participate. It's not going to be overtaxing. But I ask people when they're new and they're having trouble with the spiritual part, the God part, I'll say, which is your strongest hand? Now, in this room, how many people think their right hand is their strongest hand? Just raise your hand if you would. How many think their left hand is their strongest? Like if you wanted to open ketchup or something, you'd lose your... So, let me see the left hands again, please. Okay, great. Now, what I'd like you all to do is put your hands like this and push as hard as you can and tell me which hand wins. And if you're one of us, real people from the planet Earth, you're going to notice that neither hand wins. And the reason neither hand wins is because all the power is coming from where? Our brain. And the power to change is being met by an equal power what? Not to change. And so in Alcoholics Anonymous, we understand this concept because we've experienced it. And so what we teach people to do or try to get them to do is relax your hands and try to get in touch with that power that's greater than these two hands pushing against each other. There's a power that's greater than that. It doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter if you can even define it. It doesn't matter if you experience it every moment of every day. The fact that it's there means it's there. There's a lot of things that are in my life that I don't get to see, touch, smell, taste, or whatever. But I know they're there. One of them is gravity. If I were to fall right now, I certainly wouldn't fall up. I would fall down. That's the way it is. That's the way God has the game rigged. And He also has the game rigged that as you do good works for other people, He loads the game up for you. The one thing that's hard to do is when you're new is to realize there's a huge difference between the material world and the spiritual world. Most people are so far behind materially, they want to catch up right away. It's like, I want to get back what I think I lost, which I never had. But I'm going to get it back. And that's where I'm going to put my energy into doing those things that I never did to get what I never had so I can say I'm even. So the bottom line is you can only lose what you do not have. You cannot lose what you have. And that's why the people in the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous were strong to instill the fact that whatever you develop, make sure it's being developed within you, so that no matter what happens on the outside, you're always going to be comfortable enough on the inside to go through whatever that is. And when you take material things and break them down, and there's 100 pennies in $1, and if I give away 50 of those pennies, I only have half of what I started with. But in the spiritual world, I can be giving away those gifts that have been given to me and sharing them with you, and you can do the same thing. And as we're dividing, we can be multiplying. That's the way the spiritual world works. As we're dividing, we're multiplying. You know, it's like the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. The more you give away, the more you seem to have. In the other world, if you give it away, it's gone. And so that's where God has the game loaded. Just when you think you know the game, He tells you you're not even playing. You know, I know this game. You missed it again. You were almost there, Sparky, but you just made that U-turn and missed the cutoff. And so you say to yourself, and I'm sure there are days where you feel you are so close to this thing. And that's why the great mystics used to write these sayings, and some of those sayings would be, you cannot catch hold of it, nor can you let go of it. In not being able to get it, you get it. When you are speaking, it's silent. When you are silent, it speaks. And you have to allow silence throughout the day to hear that. Otherwise, your days are being used to accomplish things that really aren't important to you. They're important in the surroundings, but not important to you. And developing you is really what it's about here. And that's why when we talk about a new way of life, we don't mean that suddenly, you go to meetings and sometimes you'll hear somebody say, this program's really working for me. I have a $6 billion home and I got 12 cars and all great. That's all great stuff. But how are you doing? What do you mean, how am I doing? I just told you how I'm doing. What'd you do? Were you not listening when I was telling you that? And the deal is, it's easy to confuse what we have with who we are. And in the program as it evolves, what becomes more and more important is who I am is more important than any of this other stuff. And again, it's perceptional. And it's about living in this moment. If you take the word now, N-O-W, and you spell it backwards, it's W-O-N. When you've learned to live in the now, you've won. Because it's the only place you really can live. And therein comes the contradiction and the disconnect for me and a lot of other people, is that when you're trying to live other than in this moment is when you hear people say, I have an empty feeling. I don't feel connected. That's because you're trying to live where you can't. You're trying to live outside of this moment. And this is the only moment you have. And if you don't live this moment, then you miss out on the what? The experience. I know people today, and you may know some, and you may even be one at this time. And that's no big deal. But you're using this moment to get to the next moment. I know something better is going to happen in the next moment, so I'm going to just waste this moment to get to that one. And then when I get there, it's like, that's not what I want either, so now I got to wait for the next one. And my whole life is missing out on what's happening, waiting for it to happen. And that's why when you watch kids, they just play like that. They play like, when you start talking to a kid, my own son, when he was real young, I remember you say, well, we're going to do that tomorrow. And he'd say, is today tomorrow or is that yesterday? He used to get mixed up because kids can't think like that. But adults seem to get trained like that. If it's not what I want now, then I'm not going to worry about this. I'm going to do what? I'm going to start worrying about where I'm not and hope that I get there in a hurry. Not knowing if it's going to be better or worse than this, and then who's going to determine what's better? How many times have you gotten exactly what you wanted only to find out what? This isn't what I wanted. There's a crude saying in New York, but it says you can't shine shit. It just won't take a buff. You can deodorize it and you can polish it, but Don't try to put a buff on it. It just isn't going to happen. And the end result of that is that that's what we do sometimes. It's like, now that I got it, it's become what? My idea, so I'm stuck with it till death do us part. I made a bad move, and now I can't say I made a bad move, so I do what? I keep going. When I first got sober, I heard a guy at a meeting tell a story. He was from Texas, and he said, in Texas we tell a story about a guy who was in the bar, and he's an alcoholic, and he went out into the street, and there was a miner going by with a donkey. And he said to the miner, "Do you know how to dance?" And the miner looked at him and said, "No, sir, I don't." He said, "Well, you better learn." And he whipped out his 2 6-shooters, and he started shooting at his feet. And the miner did some little move, and eventually the guns went click, click. At which point the miner patted the donkey and pulled out a shotgun. And he said to the cowboy, "Did you ever kiss a mule's ass?" And the cowboy looked at him and said, "No, but I always wanted to." And that's the way the deal is. It has to be my idea. If it's my idea, it's good. It's my idea. If you listen to alcoholics, you'll never hear somebody say, "I really have a really bad idea." It's always, "I have a terrific idea, a great idea, a good idea." We don't even have just regular ideas. We have, something. It has to be magnified because it's coming where? From the windmill, The hamster's dead, but the wheel is still turning, Oh, yeah. And that's why I like hanging out with the guys I do, because they are just as crazy as can be. And when you hang out with them, your own insanity goes totally unnoticed. You just hang out, you just look at them and go, "Wow, did that come out of you?" I've been part of conversations where people have said, if your mother didn't have any children, there's a good chance you won't. You feel like saying, "Pace yourself. You got the whole day." This is good stuff. But in the world that we live in today, if you pick up a newspaper or you watch the TV, it's amazing how your life can be formulated around the events, and you're missing out on the content. And the content is that I go to meetings, and at these meetings, I watch people get healthy, and I watch people do good things with their lives. And if I get contaminated with all this other stuff, it looks like that's not important, when in fact it is the only important thing. The rest of the news, I have no control over. People come up and say, "What do you think about this?" Oftentimes I'll tell them I don't, because it's a waste of my time. I can't do anything about it, so I got to do something about those things I can do something about. Otherwise, I'll use up all of my energy doing what? Trying to solve a phantom problem or a problem I have nothing to do with. And that's why in the book, it talks about energy. It says, in the 10th and 11th and 12th step, as a result of these steps, you're going to have more what? Energy. And the reason you're going to have more energy is because you're turning your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him, and you're giving up on this management deal. You have a new employer, and that new employer is in charge of this stuff, and you don't know why it's happening. I don't know why half the stuff is happening. Sometimes it looks really, really sad and sorrowful, but there's nothing I can do about it. And the deal is, what I can do something about is those things I can do something about. And that's where I want to put my energy. In the 12 and 12, it says, when we have practiced all these steps and brought them into our lives, what will happen is we'll have a new and greater energy. And that energy is something you can do good with. And remember, it's all perceptional. It has nothing to do. My reality sometimes is formed by my perception, but that doesn't make it reality. It doesn't matter whether I believe or don't believe in gravity. When I fall, I go down. It's just as simple as that. So I don't have to understand everything to appreciate it and to bring it into my life. And the nice part about being sober, as time goes on, each day you become more and more aware of this individual adventure, and you realize that other people are in their adventure. And sometimes they may not look like they're as far along as we are. Tolerance. Don't get to the love too quick. It means you have to give up a lot of stuff. Tolerance. I'm not going to go for the love right now. I'm still practicing tolerance. I don't want to get too much caught up in that love thing. And it's all about perception. And where I got sober, the favorite story they used to tell about perception is the guy who had no arms and no legs, and he showed up at the house of ill repute. And the madam answered the door and disdainfully looked down at him, and she said, "Just what do you think you're going to do here?" And he looked at her just as disdainfully, and he said, "I rang the bell, didn't I?" So the deal is that no matter what that person looks like, they could be a bell ringer, and when you see people come in and they've been mugged by life, you may be talking to a bell ringer, you don't want to put a perceptional thing on them like, this guy's going to have a tough time or this person's going to have you don't know what they're going to have. That's not our job. Our job is to take them by the hand, make them feel comfortable and say, look, we found a way out of this. If you want what we have, then these are the things we do. Now, if you don't want to do that, then that's up to you. But don't expect the results that we got because we had to do these things. And sometimes that's the great turning point between the men and the boys. People don't want to do those things they need to do. And again, I don't know what's good for you. I don't even know oftentimes what's good for me. But I know that by practicing certain rituals of staying sober, going to meeting, working with others, keeping an open mind, trying to maintain a conscious contact with God, and I've broken it down into 4 categories. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and don't be attached to the results. And if I show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and I'm not attached to the results, then I notice good things seem to happen. And when I'm not practicing that, I notice that pull is not the same pull that I have when I am doing those things. And I don't have to worry about a whole lot today. There's really nothing to worry about because I've become more and more aware of the impermanence of this thing. I am living my life today so that I'm good to go regardless when that time comes. Whenever my ticket gets punched, I will have had the ride. And I would have had the ride because I'm living each day as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And somebody said to me, supposing you stop being asked to go and speak in places, how would that impact you? And I said, it wouldn't impact me at all because I have the best of what I need. I'm a sober member, I have a home group, and I work with people in Alcoholics Anonymous all the time. So I have the best of it. This is just icing on the cake. And the nice thing about it is that you get to meet a lot of new people and you get to renew a lot of friendships. I can tell you this today emphatically, and that is this group of people in this room will never be together again from this point forward. Never. We won't be next year. There'll be no chance of assembling this group. Some people will have passed away. People will have moved. All kinds of things that will happen. The impermanence. So don't get hung up on trying to keep everything the same. People say, well, I want a good routine. The best routine is death. Death is a great routine. You just lay there. You don't want routine. You want to live life each moment. And you want to live it to the fullest. And you can do that in sobriety. So I want to thank you for getting up early this morning and coming here. And I want to tell you that I wish you the very best in your sobriety. And I hope your individual adventure is something that you appreciate every single day of your life. And I hope you get to share that individual adventure with other people. Because as you give it away, you'll get to keep it. And remember, we're just on loan to one another. So we have to take very, very good care of one another. God bless you.
Okay.